Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Molly was awakened in the middle of the night by a vibration. She didn't immediately realize it was her cell phone vibrating. Someone was calling her husband James, but he, as always, was sleeping so soundly that he didn't seem to wake up, even if a firecracker went off right under his ear. "Sanja, wake up," said Molly, rubbing her husband's shoulder. "What is it? What is it?" Grudgingly, her husband grumbled through sleep. Then he rolled onto his other side and snored softly again. "James, your phone hasn't stopped ringing." "It must be something urgent," Molly suggested. James grudgingly reached for his cell phone and looked at the glowing screen. What he saw really worried him. "Who is it?" asked his wife. The father answered James. The woman's heart jumped in her chest. Molly felt that she could not expect good news from Charles at this late hour. "Papa, hello. I'm listening. What is the matter?" James answered the phone excitedly. "Son, Mommy was gone," in a muffled, shaky voice, answered on the other end of the line. James was taken aback. "She passed away 15 minutes ago," Charles answered. Molly was sitting very close to her husband and could clearly hear the whole conversation. Tears came to her eyes. She truly loved her mother-in-law. Nancy so happened that Molly herself was left without a mother at an early age. She died suddenly when her daughter was only 4 years old. After her death, Molly was left in the care of her loving father, grandparents, numerous aunts and other relatives who loved her and paid a lot of attention. And when Molly met Nancy, she was a kindred spirit. She was submissive, caring, kind, hardworking, infinitely in love with her family. That's how Molly imagined a real mother should be, so to realize that her mother-in-law was gone was overwhelming. "What are you talking about? This can't be true." "I just talked to my mom on the phone this afternoon, and she was fine. She was feeling fine. I didn't believe James." Yes, that's right, son. But just before she went to sleep, she suddenly felt sick. It stung. She took some medicine in her heart area, but the pain didn't go away. Soon it got worse. I called an ambulance, but when the doctors arrived, there was nothing they could do. They said it looked like acute heart failure. "I can't believe it," James said in a depressed voice. "It just can't be. I don't believe it either. I'm confused." "Son, please come as soon as you can." "I feel very badly asked by my father." "Of course, Dad. Don't worry, I'll be with you as soon as I can." "Hang in there," said James and pressed the off button. For several minutes, Molly and her husband sat huddled together in oppressive silence. Both were in a state of shock. "We have to get ready." Finally, James said, "I'll call into work, get off work, and go to my dad's. There's so much to do. Arrange a proper funeral. Arrange for a place in the cemetery and a lot of bureaucracy. Dad can't do it alone. And it hasn't been 6 months since he had his stroke. He's still very weak, and he needs to take care of himself. And there's a lot of grief. I'm afraid he's going to have a complete breakdown. After so much stress, of course, my love." "What are you talking about?" Molly agreed. "I will go with you and help you with everything. You will come with me." "What about the children?" "I'll take them to my father. He will be happy to look after them while we are away," Molly assured her husband. "I can't leave you in this situation. You and I are always together, for better or for worse. How lucky am I to have you?" "I don't know what I would do without you," said James, and he hugged me tightly. Beloved wife, Molly packed a suitcase with the essentials, and it barely dawned. The couple took the children, 6-year-old daughter Vanessa and 13-year-old son David, to grandfather, and they went on a long journey to the home village of James, to the places where he was born, where he spent his childhood and youth. And one day he met his future wife. It would take the couple at least 8 hours to get there. If there were no force majeure, we would be at my father's house by lunchtime. James estimated, looking at the clock. "I beg you, just to not drive," Molly asked after they had been in an accident last year. She was terrified of fast driving. "Don't worry, honey. I'll be extremely careful," James assured her. "You get some sleep. It's been a sleepless night, Molly." Molly relaxed and closed her eyes. She knew that if her husband promised her everything would be under control, then everything would be all right. She trusted him. She could rely on him. Molly was content with her life and not cheating. She could say that she was a perfectly happy person. She genuinely loved her spouse, their wonderful children, a beautiful, comfortable home. Friends envied Molly. The native women rejoiced, for she was indeed very lucky with her husband. James was a positive man in everything, a wonderful family man and provider, caring, attentive, loving. Even after 15 years of marriage, he would carry his wife in his arms and fulfill her every whim. Molly suddenly remembered how pregnant she had been with their first child. She had been nauseated and always wanted something strange. Oh, poor Daddy had had it with his nervous wife, and she didn't like this and that wrong. But he patiently endured it all, and it seems, with each passing day, only loved more. One day, when she was only a couple of weeks away from giving birth, she woke him up in the middle of the night and told him she wanted strawberries terribly. Any other man in his position would have told his wife to go fuck herself with her wishes, but not James. Without further ado, he packed up and ran to find berries for his beloved. It was freezing in the middle of February. At 2:00 a.m., all the stores were closed. But Molly was sure James would come home with strawberries. He will certainly find it, and if necessary, he will get a star from the sky. All she had to do was ask. Soon Molly was thawing out. The heat from the heater in the car made her eyelids feel heavy, and she dozed off. She dreamt of Kevin, her first love. The young man was standing in the middle of a daisy field, waving at her invitingly. Molly saw a face dear to her heart, open and kind, his sparkling eyes and the sensuous lips that had kissed her so tenderly. She was very happy to see Kevin, waved him back, and immediately rushed toward him. The dry grass hurt her bare feet. But Molly still walked steadily toward Kevin. But the closer she got, the less defined her vision of him became. And when she was only a few steps away from him, he suddenly vanished into thin air like the morning mist. "No, don't disappear," Molly shouted and opened her eyes. "Beloved, it's all right. Worry, James." "Yes," answered her spouse. "I was just dreaming." Kevin had come to her in a dream for the third time in the past week. What was it about? She would not tell him that she had just had a dream about her former lover. Why reopen the past? And at such a tragic time. James was already having a hard time. He lost the mother of the man who gave him life. He has a funeral ahead of him, a funeral service in a church, a wake. So why make it worse? The atmosphere and remind him of the dramatic events of long ago. Molly looked out the window at the fallen trees of the river, the scenery of the countryside, and thought about how everyone has a place they'd like to go back to. Molly had one too. You can't get there by plane or train. There are no trains or buses. But just for a moment she could disconnect from the hustle and bustle, close her eyes, and she was transported back to that unforgettable. Even though many years had passed since then, she remembered every detail of how it all began. That morning she awoke a few minutes before the alarm clock. By the sound of the front door slamming, it was Molly's father leaving for work. As you know, Monday is a hard day, and this one was harder, as she never wanted to get up at all. The girl lay sadly, staring into the frosty morning gloom outside the window, and thought about how she was tired of the drabness of everyday life, the monotony and lack of something joyful in life, which could give her a boost. My everyday is Groundhog Day. Molly sighed and sat up on the bed. She'd only just awakened, but already she felt deathly tired, as if she were not 18 years old, but all of 80. She felt like she was bogged down in a swamp of study and household chores. Was this really what life was all about? Pessimistic, she thought. Molly looked longingly at the calendar. It was January 20. The New Year's holiday was behind her, and spring was still so far away. It seemed to her that she just did not have the strength to live up to the first rays of sunshine. Wrapping herself in a terry robe, Molly went into the kitchen and poured herself a cup of strong tea. Then she quickly put the notebooks in her bag and ran to the streetcar stop. Ahead of her was another long day at college, as dull, boring as any other. By the time Molly got home, it was already dark. You get up in the morning, it's still dark. You come home, it's dark. It's like living in a dungeon. Can't see any white light. The girl thought to herself sadly as she hurried home. She decided to take a shortcut and go through the park. Molly usually avoided this route because it was not crowded, but she could save 10 minutes by taking the shortcut. Molly walked quickly through the alleys, and at one point she heard footsteps approaching from behind. The girl turned around and in the dim light of the lanterns, noticed the long-haired figure of a man. She quickened her pace, and he did the same. In fright, Molly rushed to run, but the lanky man quickly caught up with her and unceremoniously grabbed her by the arm and began to drag her to his hut to, as he put it, have a little fun together. "Let me go, I'm not going anywhere with you." Molly resisted, fighting back in horror with her purse of notes. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her handbag full of her notes. "You don't want to go to your uncle's house. We can set up right here. I'm sure you'll like it, and you'll want more," said the stranger, hugging Molly's breath and smiling vilely, smiling. "Help!" shouted Molly, but the bastard immediately put his hand over her mouth and dragged her toward the bushes. Molly had already mentally bid farewell to life, but suddenly, by some lucky chance, a young man in military fatigues burst out of the streetlight. "You, I see, are not taught to treat women." He turned to the bastard. "What did you say?" "Go to hell, soldier boy." "Don't interfere," the man replied. "Maybe you did not notice that the girl does not want to go with you? She obviously does not like you. Neither do I. And who are you? What's with the attitude? I thought you were going somewhere. Now, mind your own business." "Rookie, and get out of here," grinned the lanky one. "And I'm the one who won't let you." "You've got some nerve with the girl. Get out, or I'll teach you a lesson in manners," the boy replied. The man squinted and gave him a contemptuous look. "Snotty. You don't know who you're messing with," he hissed and dug into his pocket. A moment later, the knife blade glinted in the twilight, and the long-haired man hurled Molly across the snow-covered ground so that she fell, then launched himself with the knife at the young man before he could even open his mouth. The scoundrel had his back to his rival, and to be sure he grabbed his collar with his other hand and squeezed his neck. The wretch had fluttered a few times and realized that he could never get out of that clinging embrace. "Never throw yourself at strangers," said the lad. "It might end badly for you, eh? But today's your lucky day, I'm kind. So get out and think hard about your behavior." The long-necked man hurriedly wiggled away, saying dirty curses under his breath. "Thank you. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened to me," said Molly with a grateful look in her blue eyes at her savior. "It is nothing, but a fragile girl should not walk alone in crowded places," the boy remarked. "I usually don't." "Today is the first time I've made an exception in a long time," Molly admitted. "It could have been fatal for you. You live far away." "I'll walk you home, if you don't mind," said the young man. "I would be grateful to you," Molly answered. They walked slowly towards the exit of the park. "By the way, my name is Kevin. And you?" the young man asked. "And I am Molly," she answered. "Isn't that an unusual name?" "It must be your birthday in March," Kevin suggested. "Not at all," she smiled. "Although many people, when they first hear my name, that's what they think. Actually, I was born in September, and Molly was named after my great-grandmother. She was Polish by birth. They say that we are very similar in appearance and character. Is it true or not? I don't know exactly. I don't have a picture of her, unfortunately. And I never saw her when she was alive. She died long before I was born. And in our village, we're not allowed to name newborns after the deceased," Kevin pointed out. "Why not?" Molly wondered if it would be an unhappy fate. The boy answered, and immediately regretted what he had said. The girl had just survived an attack. She's been through a lot, and he comes at her with his village superstitions. "I was in the army." Kevin hastened to change the subject and went AWOL today, to buy cigarettes for myself and my comrades. I was on my way back when I heard a scream. At first I thought I was imagining things, but I decided to go back and check if everything was okay. That's just lucky for me. "I can't imagine what would have happened if it hadn't been for you," Molly confessed. "I wish I could thank you. Let's go to my house. I'll buy you tea and hot sandwiches. You wouldn't get that in the army." Kevin politely declined at first, but Molly managed to persuade him to stop by for a few minutes. The young people sat in the kitchen and had an unmixed conversation. When Molly's father came home, I didn't know we had company. He was surprised to see his daughter's new friend eating his sandwiches with gusto. Kevin hastily stood up, introduced himself, and extended his hand to the host. Dad, he's a real hero. Can you believe it? He got me out of the clutches of a maniac. Twisted him into a ram's horn. Molly exclaimed. You're exaggerating, aren't you? The boy was embarrassed. Todd a little bit of a scumbag that way. After hearing the story of Molly's lucky rescue, her father was not in the least worried. He was either thanking Kevin or scolding his daughter for wandering around in the dark. It's not clear where. You come in to see us, young man. The doors of this house will always be open to you. The master said to his guests goodbye. I'll be sure to stop by, Kevin promised, and he left. But as the days passed, he did not appear. Molly waited, hoping, shuddering at every rustle behind the door. But her night never came. Maybe he just didn't like me. Frustratedly, Molly decided. But one day, 3 weeks later, the doorbell rang. The girl opened the door she saw on the threshold. Kevin, why didn't you come? Why did you disappear? You were gone so long. She reproached him. I'm sorry, I couldn't go to the brig because I was away for so long. Kevin said in his excuse, it was all my fault. Molly exclaimed, not at all. It's your own fault. I shouldn't have stayed in the kitchen, but I really wanted sandwiches, he smiled. Well, come on in. I'll make some more. The girl was happy. I would love to, but unfortunately I can't. I have to run to the unit, sighed Kevin. I only popped in to see you for a minute and ask if you're busy this Sunday. I'll be on leave, and we could go for a walk together. If you're up for it, of course. I gladly admitted to Molly. After that Sunday stroll, the young men began to date. Pretty soon, mutual feelings flared up between them. Their relationship was open and trusting. Kevin did not hide from Molly that a girl named Wendy was waiting for him there in his native village. They lived next door to each other, growing up in front of each other. They went to school together and sat at the same desk. Wendy saw him off to the army and wrote him letters every week. I thought I loved her too. Until the moment I met you, Kevin Molly confessed, and she had nothing to tell. Until then, she had never felt such vivid feelings for anyone and remained chaste. One day, after 6 months of their affair, when her father was not at home, Molly decided on the first intimacy with Kevin. After that, they lay cuddled together on a narrow girl's bed. But the two of them were not cramped together. When I don't see you for a long time, I start to forget what you look like, Kevin confessed to her then. Ah, that's how much I mean to you, Molly remarked, reproachfully, her lips pouting. What are you, my love? What are you explaining? Kevin has never meant as much to me as you have. Believe me, you're the only person who really matters about Wendy. That's probably what you said, a jealous Molly asked. Well, what does Wendy have to do with it? How many times have I told you it was a childish infatuation, no more? Feelings for her don't compare with you. They simply cannot be compared. It's like a spark and a flame of eternal fire, like a drop of water and the Atlantic Ocean. You are my true love. I forget you precisely because of your absolute uniqueness. Your image is so unique, so delightful, that I cannot keep it in my memory in its entirety. I gave you my picture. Look at it and remember, Molly smiled coquettishly. No picture can replace the real you, sighed Kevin. I want you to be always by my side. I want to fall asleep with you. And when I wake up in the morning, I want to see your face again. You'll get sick of me so fast. Molly smiled. No way, Kevin answered. You know I'm going to be mobilized soon. Come with me. I thought of that. Molly was surprised. That's impossible. Isn't it? Kevin exclaimed. I've got it all figured out. By my demobilization, you'll have passed all your exams, received your diploma, become a free bird, and come with me as a bride. And we'll get married there. Married? Molly asked back. What do you mean? Are you proposing to me now? Yes, the young man nodded. Believe me, I'll make the wedding for us. All at the highest level. You'll do it. I don't know about that. It's so sudden. I have to think about it, Molly said flirtatiously. Though really that was all she had ever dreamed of. The The girl was so in love that she was willing to walk to the ends of the earth for Kevin. Not to go to his godforsaken village. James' voice interrupted the flood of memories. "Honey, we're almost there. You are not too tired, I hope?" asked the caring husband. "No, I am all right," Molly answered quietly and looked out the window of the car, already approaching the village. She was going back to the place where she had once known great happiness and unbearable sorrow. The road was icy, and James slowed down. Time seemed to stand still here, and nothing had changed at all over the years. The couple drove slowly down Main Street past the house where Kevin's family had once lived. Molly stared out the windows of the house. She thought she might see Kevin's smiling face behind the transparent curtains. But of course, it didn't and couldn't happen. Another family had lived in that house for a long time. "Watch where you're going." James cursed loudly. He braked sharply. "Have you had enough to live for?" Just in front of the car of the couple, without looking back, ran a female figure. "She fell asleep, didn't she? I almost ran her over. A little more and they would have pulled her out from under the wheels." "That's all I needed now," James grumbled irritably. Molly stared at the distracted woman as she backed away. She recognized her at once. It was Wendy. The woman had put on a noticeable weight. Her gait wasn't as light, but her raven black hair, flicked back from beneath the white cap, was still thick and lustrous. "I wonder if she's still single," Molly thought, seeing Wendy off with a long glance. At last the couple stopped at a small private house. Charles was already there to meet them at the gate. James got out of the car and immediately put his father in his arms. They could not hold back their tears. He had visibly decreased since the stroke. Molly noted to herself that he had lost weight. He had lost weight. She hadn't seen her father-in-law in a long time. When he had his stroke, James went to visit his father and mother alone without her. They had a very sick Vanessa at the time, and Molly couldn't leave her daughter. And now she looked at Charles crying and couldn't hold back the tears herself. The once healthy, sturdy man, a real giant, now looked like a withered old man. Everything in the house was a reminder of the landlady's recent stay. It seemed as if she had just gone out for a while and was about to return home. On the table, there was a plate of apple pie prepared the day before. On the rocking chair were Nancy's glasses and unfinished knitting. That night, Molly could not sleep for a long time. Memories flashed through her mind and rattled her soul. Then years ago, her father had blessed her to marry Kevin. And as soon as her lover's service was over, they went to his shared home together. Molly's parents greeted her somewhat reservedly. The reason was the girl Wendy, whom they thought and hoped their son would marry. The mother considered her son's act to be dishonorable. Once Molly even unwittingly overheard their unpleasant conversation. "Why did you, Wendy, fool around? Rebuke Kevin's mother. The girl was waiting for you. She did not go out with anyone or to the movies, or to the dances with her friends. And when else to go out, as not at her age, all at home, like a dog on a leash. Every day she'd check in on us, wondering if she'd heard from you. Yes, Wendy is like a daughter to us, and she loves you with all her heart, and you're a knife in her back. How can we face her parents now? I mean, we already thought of them as our matchmakers, preparing for the wedding. Mom, how could I do it on purpose? I didn't meet Molly and fall in love with her out of spite. I'm very sorry about Wendy, too. She's a nice, decent girl. But you can't help it, Kevin made excuses. There was nothing to do, and the parents had to put up with the choice of an only son. And Molly really wanted to see this Wendy. She was curious about her predecessor. Soon Kevin and Molly got the chance. They ran into Wendy a couple of days later at the grocery market. And Kevin didn't tell me how pretty she was. Molly thought, with annoyance. She had expected to see a humble country bumpkin, but there stood before her a stately and rather beautiful girl with a thick mop of stinging black hair proud. Wendy then measured her rival with a contemptuous glance and silently walked past her unfaithful fiancé and his companion. Kevin's parents' house was small and old, and the furnishings were very humble. Nevertheless, they gave the young couple a separate room and a small plot of land for their own vegetable garden. It was the 1990s. The local kolkhozs went bankrupt, the firm closed, and jobs were scarce. Kevin and Molly dreamed of getting married, but the lovers had no money, even for a modest celebration. Let me write to my father, repeatedly suggested the girl. He will surely send us the necessary amount of money. No, categorically objected Kevin. Now I am responsible for you. What kind of husband would I be to you? If I take money from my future father-in-law. Thank God I'm not an invalid. I've got arms and legs and a head, which means I'll make money. I'm sure something will turn up. There's no way to make money. The girl sighed. It's a small village. Not enough jobs for everybody. Why don't we go back to the city? There are more opportunities there. Don't panic, everything will work out. Her lover consoled her. I have a former classmate, James, works in the local police department. I'll go talk to him today. Maybe I could get a job there as a driver. Molly asked Kevin to go with her. He didn't say no. And so for the first time, she met James, serious and thorough. He made a positive impression on her. Alas, unfortunately, we are not in need of drivers at the moment, he said. However, there is a place in the office. The work is not dusty, but the salary is small. If you are willing, you can get Molly a job there. So the girl got a job. But Kevin survived on odd jobs and odd jobs, which did not suit the young man. Molly saw how her beloved was saddened and grieved by this. Kevin came home one day in high spirits. I met a friend of mine today, he said. We hadn't seen each other for 100 years. The last time we met was before the army. Anyway, he told me that he's a rare man in the village now, because he's gone into trucking. He bragged that he earned good money and sometimes even went abroad. He recently brought his VCR from Germany. So I asked him in detail, what's up? Did they need drivers? He said that the company always needed smart and reliable chauffeurs. He gave me the contacts of his superiors, and I called them right away. We had a little talk and agreed that tomorrow I would come with the documents to join the staff. Molly, to put it mildly, not very much liked the idea, and loved the delight she did not share. It's dangerous, she exclaimed. Come on, what's so dangerous? Just sit on the road. Keep your eyes on the road and turn the wheel. Kevin hastened to reassure her. If my friend is right, I'll be making good money. We will finally. We can get married this summer, and we'll buy you a dress. And a restaurant in the district center, order a Toastmaster. So that everything will be at the highest level. What's your dream? My dream is that you'll always be there for me. And these flights can last for several days or even weeks. I don't want to be apart for long. Molly was upset. I can't imagine being here alone without you. And there are all kinds of crime stories and traffic accidents on TV. I'll be worried. Kevin then hugged his beloved tightly and promised that nothing bad would happen to him. I will pray for you every night. Molly promised then. But that, alas, did not keep her beloved from terrible trouble. Molly woke up. From the kitchen came the voices of James and her father-in-law. She got up, got dressed, and went out to the men. My father and I are going to get the death certificate now, then to the morgue and to the cemetery. We have to get everything ready for the funeral. According to a rough estimate, there will be 12 people, maybe a little more. I'll try to arrange a wake with a local resident. Don't do that. Why waste the money? It'll come in handy. Let's save it for a proper memorial for Nancy. There's not a lot of people here. I'll make the memorial dinner myself, Molly said. Are you sure, darling? I wouldn't want to put all this trouble on you. Believe me, James, no trouble at all. It will be my tribute to my dear mother-in-law, his wife assured him. The next 2 days were spent preparing for the funeral. On the third day, everyone said goodbye to Nancy and committed her body to the ground. Everything went well, and the deceased was led off with all the proper honors in such a case. As promised, Molly took care of all the arrangements for the nominal table. She bought a lot of groceries at the market, made a lot of salads and all kinds of appetizers, most of which she had learned to make in the past from her late mother-in-law. As she set the table, Molly noticed that she needed to add pickles in their quest, so she went down to the basement. Nancy had been a great hostess in her lifetime, and Molly knew she was bound to find some tasty preserves at her place, shining a flashlight on herself. The woman perused the shelves of jars, and there was nothing there. Pickled cucumbers, parsley, alecco, zucchini, caviar, all kinds of jams and compote. Molly reached for a jar of pickled tomatoes and accidentally dropped her keys. She stooped to pick up the bundle and snagged some sort of rag knot with the bundle. It was sticking out of a crevice in the boardwalk. Molly pulled it out slowly. She unwrapped it and gasped. A man's watch was in front of her. She knew it at once. It belonged to Kevin. Molly felt dizzy and leaned against the cold wall to keep from falling. The woman remembered well that spring morning, the first rays of sunlight breaking through the window. Molly was packing Kevin for his next long trip. He put on the blue shirt that suited him so well and clasped the metal strap on his wrist. The very same watch. Molly stood back and admired him. She had news she planned to tell him when her beloved returned from his voyage. But she couldn't help it and let it slip through her fingers. "It seems we are going to have a baby boy." Kevin was so happy he was about to jump to the ceiling. He picked her up in his arms and circled her around the room. "So we should hurry up with the wedding," he exclaimed. "As soon as I get back from the voyage, we'll apply right away. You and I have already saved the bulk of the money. If necessary, we'll borrow a little from friends. But the wedding will not delay any longer. I want my son to be born in a legal marriage." "My son?" Molly was surprised. "Could we have a girl?" "A girl later." "What about our first? It will be a boy, I'm sure of it," smiled Kevin. "As far as I'm concerned, as long as he's healthy, the rest doesn't matter," answered the girl. "Take care of yourself and our baby," Kevin said. As farewell, he hugged his beloved tightly and left. Molly never saw him again. The truck Kevin found 2 days later on the side of the road in a clearing, 50 kilometers from home. There was no one in the driver's cab, and the valuable cargo he was carrying, weighing several tons, had disappeared without a trace. Molly and Kevin's parents were worried sick. They then toured every hospital morgue in the area, but Kevin was neither among the living nor the dead. Confused, Molly felt in her heart that something terrible had happened to her beloved. She tried with all her might to find Kevin and find out what had happened to him. At this time, she had the tireless help of James, for which the girl was immensely grateful to him. Together with him and his parents, they organized a group of local people who went through the woods, step by step, meter by meter, looking for Kevin. Molly and James drove around the townships, train stations, and parking lots with a picture of Kevin. They showed the picture to locals in the hope that someone might be able to identify him and provide important information. But everyone just shrugged and assured them that they had never seen the man in the picture before. Once, on her way back from one of these trips, Molly could not stand it and burst into tears. How could it be? She was indignant, for a man is not a needle in a haystack. He can't just disappear. There must be some trace, some evidence, witnesses, unless he himself wants to be found, James pointed out. "What do you mean?" The girl was surprised. "What do you mean, couldn't Kevin have conspired with the criminals? Conspired a robbery and run away with expensive merchandise?" he asked. "That's not uncommon now, unfortunately. I've seen a lot of different frauds in my line of work." "How could you think such a thing of Kevin?" offended Molly. "How could you even think such a crazy idea? He is a decent and honest man who would never take someone else's money." James did not argue with Molly at the time. He saw that she was in a depressed state, and it was not worth continuing such difficult conversations. She didn't want to discuss the subject either. Still, however, James' words planted a tiny grain of doubt in her. What if all of this really is true? Maybe I really didn't know Kevin very well. Molly wondered sometimes. The next day, the investigator assigned to Kevin's case showed up on the doorstep. First, he had a long talk with the parents of the missing driver, and then Molly herself answered all his questions. "Tell me, didn't your common-law spouse share any criminal plans with you?" asked the investigator a question, looking intently into the eyes of the frightened girl. He was very young, wore a beard for solidity. "No, there was no such thing," Molly answered muffledly, tirelessly rubbing the neck of her turtleneck. "You think about it, you think back, and maybe not directly but with half a hint. He was hinting that he was going to do some profitable business. Promised he'd be rich soon. And your life would change." The investigator continued to insist. "No," Molly stated confidently. Well, then I'll ask you another question, sighed the investigator. What can you say about your financial situation? Were you and your husband financially happy? Did you have enough to live on? Molly answered vaguely. And you, Kevin, didn't want more? The investigator asked incredulously. I have testimony from witnesses who say that you dreamed of a big wedding. And at today's prices, it is a very costly event. Of course I did. Who wouldn't? Everyone dreams of a better lot. Molly nodded, swallowing nervously. But not everyone goes to the trouble of making an easy buck. As a matter of fact, as the investigator remarked, I'm not quite sure what you're getting at. Do you really think that Kevin and I planned this whole thing in advance? Are you accusing us of fraud? The girl was indignant. I said no such thing, answered the investigator, jotting something down with a pencil in his thick notebook. But this version, too, as you understand, is not to be dismissed. What version? Molly was surprised at the version that your common-law husband decided to swindle you to make some money. The investigator continued. He staged the whole show with the robbery, ditched his employer, and he fled in an unknown direction, taking the cargo in order to sell it. So this direction is unknown to us. And you, of course, know where Kevin is now, but carefully concealing the whereabouts of a civilian husband. And in 6 months or so, when everything calms down and the case is closed due to insufficient evidence, you will quietly go to him abroad, or where he is hiding for life. Of course, the loot will not be enough for both of you, but for a while will allow you to survive quite comfortably. I'm right. No, you are not. Molly was indignant. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. How could you think such a thing? We're good citizens, and we respect the law. Are we some kind of Italian mobsters or criminals like Bonnie and Clyde? You don't know anything about people. Well, you do. Why don't you tell me whose lipstick we found in the back of the truck? Asked the investigator and smirked. What other lipstick? Molly asked again. The color of ripe cherries, said the investigator, taking out of the folder the photo, the evidence, and handing it to Molly. I have no idea, the girl admitted. So you're saying it's lipstick. It's not yours. It's not mine, that's for sure. That bright color doesn't suit me. It's the first time I've ever seen her quietly, Molly said. And what was it doing in the car of your civil husband? Asked the investigator. I have no idea. Maybe Kevin was just dropping someone off on the way? Molly suggested. It's possible. It's also possible that the lipstick belongs to his accomplice. Did he say anything to you about any of his acquaintances? No, the girl admitted. I don't know who might have kept that lipstick. It turns out that you contradict yourself. First, you say you know Kevin very well, that you're sure of him, and now you say you don't know who might have been in the truck with him, who he might have talked to. So Kevin may have been hiding something from you. I don't know. I guess he could have. Molly was confused. But he's not capable of a crime. Kevin couldn't steal and run away. That damned lipstick and the investigator's questions shocked Molly. She had no idea. Where had this object of feminine beauty come from in her lover's car? Of course, Molly was not born yesterday and had heard about the priestesses of love, the services of which are often used by truckers on the highway. But her Kevin, he's not like that at all. He's a decent man. He wouldn't do anything. Or would Molly? I didn't know what to think anymore. So what do you think happened to Kevin? The investigator asked, stroking his beard. How should I know? Molly shrugged. Maybe he was attacked. Maybe held hostage for ransom. So you still stand your ground and say that he could not have committed the crime? Asked the investigator, squinting his eyes. He looked at Molly as if he were trying to drill a hole in her. Couldn't without a second thought answer. The Kevin girl just wasn't capable of that sort of thing. Are you sure about this? 100%. Why would he do that? To throw his whole life away. Hiding, framing my parents for me. You'd be surprised, but sometimes people go on the run for less money and put their loved ones in danger. The investigator remarked, writing something in his notebook again. I already know that very well. Kevin didn't take anything he didn't want. Molly continued to insist. Well, then who did? Asked the investigator. How should I know? I am not a policeman. That's your job, not mine. You were supposed to look for criminals." Molly's voice trembled treacherously. Her nerves gave out, and she cried. "We will. Do not doubt it," sternly said the investigator, and severely punished. "And you are free to go, but you may be needed at any moment. One more thing. You must inform me at once of any news or visit from Kevin. Understand, it is in your own interest." Right after the investigator left, Molly went to James. "Did you know about the lipstick?" "In the forehead?" she asked. "I knew." The man admitted honestly. "Why didn't he tell me?" Molly reproached him. "Why did he hide? You know how I feel." "I didn't want to upset you further with what was already a very complicated case. Kevin is gone. So is the merchandise. And then there's the damn lipstick. You're all worked up. I didn't want to worry you." James tried to justify himself after talking to the investigator. Molly couldn't find her place. She was nervous, mad with grief and uncertainty. She lost her appetite and developed insomnia. One night, the girl felt a severe pain in the lower abdomen. Kevin's mother called an ambulance, which took Molly to the hospital. It turned out that the woman's body could not withstand the emotional stress, and she miscarried under extreme stress. "I'm sorry, Kevin, I didn't save our son." Molly cried bitterly into her hospital pillow. First, she lost the one she loved, then their unborn child. At one time, she didn't even want to live. Could it be my name, the one I was given after the deceased? Molly pondered. Maybe, in fact, we should not name newborns after the deceased. Her great-grandmother's fate could hardly be called happy. She had survived the death of her husband and 2 newborn children. And now her great-granddaughter's life seemed to be covered in a thick fog. Trouble. Nevertheless, for a long time, Molly did not give up hope of finding Kevin alive. Several times she and Kevin's parents went to the morgue for identification. But each time the terrible fear was not confirmed. Only once did the girl hesitate when she saw the burnt corpse of a young man. Forensics reported that he matched the missing Kevin in age and height, but neither Kevin's mother nor Molly herself could say with any certainty whether Kevin was theirs or not. If they had shown us an item of his clothing, a belt, a watch, or even a button from his shirt, I would have recognized it right away, Molly said. But they didn't have that kind of detail. A year later, Kevin was reported missing. The girl remained at her lover's house all that time and continued to wait for him. But hopes for Kevin's return faded with each passing day, and Molly's life in the village was becoming more and more unbearable as everything around her. Every tree, every alleyway reminded her of the short-lived happiness of her family. In the girl's soul, a tiny flame of hope for return. This flame did not allow the grief of loss to appear. But as time passed, Molly's sense of inner desolation and helplessness grew stronger. From the constant waiting for the missing Kevin inside the abandoned Molly, who now existed in a waiting mode, contradictory feelings were rising. On the one hand, her beloved was not there. It meant that Kevin no longer existed. But on the other, she hadn't seen his body, hadn't said goodbye to him, hadn't buried him. So he wasn't among the dead either. At some point, Molly began to doubt the reality of what was happening. One sleepless night, she had the delusional idea that Kevin had ever existed. Was he really there? Or was it all just a trick of her fevered imagination? Was she imagining it all? Molly realized her psyche couldn't take the strain anymore. She realized with horror that in a little while she would go crazy with grief and melancholy. Perhaps I should go away more and more, she thought. Kevin was no longer around, which meant there was nothing keeping her in the village. And on what basis was she now living in Kevin's house? She used to be his fiancée, his sweetheart, his only one, and now she is not his daughter-in-law, not his widow. In a word, no one. Her parents, Kevin of course, had not chased her away, but still now Molly felt like a stranger in their home and superfluous. One day she overheard Kevin's mother complaining to a neighbor. If only my son had married Wendy, he would have lived in peace. She's a simple girl from the village. Molly's a city girl. She wants a fancy wedding with a cottage and restaurants. That's my Kevin chasing the big bucks. That's what got him killed for her. Molly almost choked with resentment. She wanted to scream that it wasn't like that that it wasn't her fault. But she didn't want to prove anything to anyone. Why should she? You couldn't convince them anyway. After this incident, Molly finally decided to leave the village. She quit her job. She packed her things and got on a train to return to her hometown to her father. 2 weeks later, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Molly opened the door and, to her great surprise, saw James with a bouquet of flowers on the threshold of her parents' apartment. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see you. I realized I can't live without you," he said. "I love you and I want you to be my wife. You're out of your mind. You know I can't. I'm engaged to Kevin. I'm waiting for him. One day he'll come back, and then? And if he doesn't?" James interrupted her. "You'll still be alone for the rest of your life. Is it worth burying yourself alive?" Molly didn't have an answer. So much time had passed. Maybe it really was time to come back to life. Existing in anticipation is difficult. It is exhausting. Waiting is incredibly hard. And Molly is simply tired of the whole nightmare. It must be said that the girl was very won over by such a desperate act of James. It was worth a lot to come to her hundreds of kilometers away. However, she was in no hurry to accept his marriage proposal. She had her doubts and asked her father for advice. "Marry James." "Daughter," he said, "I can see that James is a positive man, a serious man, a man you can't be lost for. He treats you with all his heart. You can tell he feels strongly about you. And you're still young. And you have every right to be happy. You don't have to give up on yourself. If the worst has happened and Kevin is dead, believe me, he doesn't care if you're free or not. Knowing him, I think he would even be glad for you. If Kevin has really escaped, as the investigator supposed, you are losing your youth and your loyalty to him in vain, aren't you?" Molly listened to her father's advice, and after a month of reflection, she accepted James' proposal. They married and soon left for the village to visit James's parents. Molly hated going back to those places, but she couldn't help but respect her father-in-law and mother-in-law, especially since Nancy and Charles accepted their daughter-in-law as their own daughter. Word spread quickly in the village, and all the locals already knew that Kevin the bride had married his mate. Molly tried not to go outside the house gates to avoid gossip and prying eyes. She knew that many people judged her and considered her a traitor, and most of all Kevin's parents. But there was one other person Molly dreaded meeting. It was Wendy. James told her that Wendy had not given up hope of finding Kevin, that she continued her independent search even after the case was closed. She traveled to the capital for. She put ads in the newspaper, put up flyers, and even went into debt to pay for an expensive banner with her picture on it that had been put up on the freeway. All this should have been my doing, not hers. Molly reproached herself. She was very ashamed of herself and Kevin's parents and Kevin himself. She felt like Judas, but in time all those feelings dulled. Days of weeks, months, years went by. Molly's family life went on. James proved to be an excellent husband and earner, thanks to his assertive and pushy character. James did well in the city, and the couple soon had their own place. A year later, they had a son, Molly. I really wanted to name him Kevin after my ex-boyfriend, but I changed my mind. I do not want him to repeat his bitter fate. She decided and gave the newborn the name David. And the couple had a daughter, Vanessa. They lived well and together, in prosperity and happiness, without swearing or scandals. Molly, in her own way, loved her husband very much and was grateful for everything he did for her and the children. Nevertheless, not a day went by that she did not think of Kevin. From time to time, Molly would look up into the night sky and quietly ask, "Where are you, Kevin? In what land? In what unknown worlds? Do you remember me, or is that where you are now?" There were no memories. Sometimes Kevin would come to her in her dreams. Sometimes it happened that his own face would be seen in the crowd of passersby. Her heart sank every time a young man in uniform glimpsed on the horizon. And once Molly even rushed across a busy highway after a man who reminded her so much of her first lost love. But it was, of course, not him, Molly, just another mistake. And now, so many years later, she was holding Kevin's watch and couldn't figure out how it ended up here in James's parents' basement, who carefully hid the watch in a knot and shoved it under the boards. And what for? The only conclusion was that James knew something. He had something to do with the disappearance. Molly suggested, and that made her feel bad. What if James was involved not only in Kevin's disappearance, but in something worse? Molly almost fainted from her frightening guess. She struggled to pull herself together. With trembling fingers, the woman wrapped the watch in a rag and shoved it back into the slot. Then she grabbed the first jar she could find from the shelf and walked shakily back into the house. How Molly's wake had gone was vaguely remembered. She was literally shaking. She couldn't even say a warm word or two about Nancy because she couldn't get her teeth into it. Everyone gathered, and her father-in-law and husband included. They thought it was because Molly was grieving for her mother-in-law, who had passed away untimely. In the evening, she had a fever, and Molly lay there unable to move. James fidgeted and worried beside his wife. She looked at him, refusing to believe the obvious. Then she never dared to tell him of her discovery. After the funeral, James stayed in the village for a week to sort out some inheritance matters. And Molly returned home by train. She immediately got her things from the apartment and moved in with her father. "The children and I are going to stay with you for a while. The thing is, James and I had a big fight. Everything is very serious, and most likely, we are divorcing vaguely," she declared. Molly's father was shocked by this turn and persistently urged his daughter to come to her senses. "Come to your senses. You have 2 children. Things happen in life. You should not do without thinking," he advised. But Molly realized her husband was up to no good. She did not know what it was, but she felt in her heart that it was wrong. Living with James, pretending that nothing happened, she certainly could not. When James settled his affairs and returned from the village, he was surprised to find the children and his wife not at home. "Can you explain to me what is going on? Why are you living with your father?" James was angry. He rushed to his father-in-law's house. "I know that you had something to do with Kevin's disappearance." Molly stated it bluntly. "What? What makes you think that?" James raised his eyebrows in surprise. He sounded surprised, as if he hadn't expected this conversation. "I found his watch in the basement. And don't tell me that you have no idea how it got there. I wouldn't believe you anyway." James didn't deny it and tried to justify himself. "I can explain," he assured his wife. "Believe me, I didn't want any part of it, but I was forced into it." In those years, our neighborhood was ruled by a serious, organized criminal group. In its ranks were violent people, real thugs who were criminals. They were responsible for hundreds, if not thousands, of deaths. They made me work for them. It was impossible to refuse. It would certainly mean certain death. And then one day they needed a load that Kevin was carrying. That's when they told me. "Please spare me the details." Molly cut him off halfway through. "I don't want to know the details of the dirty business you've been involved in. Just tell me one thing: Kevin is alive." "No," James said quietly with a sigh. "I'm so sorry. How could you? You set it up so that Kevin would end up being accused of theft, and many in the village still mistakenly consider him a criminal." Molly rebuked her husband. "I had to do it. Understand? Otherwise, I would have been killed myself." James threw up his hands. "You just don't know what kind of people lipstick is. You're the one who planted it." Molly asked quietly. "Yes," nodded James. "I had to confuse the investigation. I can't believe it." The woman exclaimed. "You let me doubt that Kevin was faithful to me. What kind of a bastard are you? You knew about the gang's plans. You could have saved Kevin, warned him, told him he was in danger. But you chickened out. I despise you." Bitter tears gushed from Molly's eyes. She covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. For years, she did not know whether to light a candle for Kevin's health or death. In the back of her mind, she cherished the shaky hope that one day they would meet. There was a man beside her, and he knew full well that it would never come true. "Darling, please, let's calm down," James said, trying to hug his weeping wife. "I want you out of my life forever." Molly whispered, pulling away from her husband. "What are you talking about?" James was surprised. "You know I love you. I've loved you from the very first moment. You don't have to be so dramatic about it. What could that simple Kevin ever give you? Yeah, he wasn't a bad guy, but he's a loser and a deadbeat. And he's been that way all his life. What kind of future could you have with him? Did you ever think about that? Brought you to our poor village and gave you a hoe to do the weeding. That's the life you dreamed of. You dreamed of it. He couldn't even arrange a wedding, let alone provide a decent living. What could that penniless ragamuffin have to offer? I was happy with him. Molly exclaimed. You weren't happy with me. Clothes trips abroad, an apartment, complete with all the modern appliances. With Kevin, you'd only have to dream about it all. So I don't give a damn about your goodness. I loved him. Molly exclaimed. Oh, come on. Don't exaggerate. Who really loved him? It was Wendy. Dryly said James lives like a lone wolf, not letting anyone near her. She's still waiting for him and keeps putting ads in the papers and on the radio. Yeah, if you loved Kevin as much as she does, you wouldn't marry me. Molly was shaking. She hated him, and she could hardly keep herself from attacking him with her fists. I'll never forgive you for what you did. Molly exclaimed. Because of you no longer in the world, Kevin. Because of you I lost my first child. You belong in prison. But if you do what I ask, I won't report you for the sake of our children. I don't want people pointing fingers at David and Vanessa and calling them murderous brats. For their sake, you need to get out of our lives. The next day, James packed his bags and left town. At first, Molly received money orders from him. According to the forwarding address, James lived somewhere in the north. Molly did not accept money from her husband and sent it back. It wasn't easy for her to raise her children alone, but she couldn't take a cent from the killer's hands. 2.5 years later, she received a telegram informing her that Charles was gone. Molly didn't go to her father-in-law's funeral. She didn't want to meet James. And recently she learned that James was gone. He died in a car accident. He was riding in the car when he had a heart attack. And now Molly is the only person who knows James' terrible secret. Unfortunately, she found out the whole truth too late. Her happiness is in the past, and now she will live for the sake of her children, raise them decent and honest people, so that they will never commit such cruel and criminal acts as their father.